The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch of the Matheson Ranch, painting everything in the golden light of memory. Cole Matheson sat in his weathered rocking chair, the wood worn smooth by 3 decades of evening contemplation. At 64, his body carried the map of a hard-lived life. Hands scarred from rope and reins, face creased by sun and wind, hair gone silver as mountain snow. But his eyes remained sharp, the same clear blue that had once tracked outlaws across Arizona territory. Beside him, his grandson, Thomas William Matheson, sat hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. The young man was 26, though grief had aged him. 2 weeks since he'd buried his wife Emma, dead from a riding accident after only 6 months of marriage. The kind of sudden loss that makes a young man question whether God is listening at all. Cole let the silence stretch, knowing that sometimes the most important words are the ones you don't rush. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, back when he wore a marshal's badge and thought justice could be delivered at the end of a gun. Time had taught him different. Time and a woman with chestnut hair and eyes like mountain lakes. "Grandpa," Thomas finally said, his voice raw as an open wound, "I don't know how to keep going. Emma was everything. How do you wake up when the reason you were waking up is gone?" Cole reached for his coffee, taking a slow sip while he gathered the right words. Not the easy words, not the comfortable lies. The truth, even when it cuts. "Let me tell you a story, son, about a man who thought his job was hunting death, and about a woman who taught him that choosing life takes more courage than any gunfight ever could." Thomas looked up, confusion flickering across his grief. "This story starts some 30 years ago," Cole continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of memory. "Copper Ridge, Arizona territory. Summer of 1884. And it starts with a woman standing alone." The old man's eyes went distant, seeing not the comfortable ranch house before him, but a smaller dwelling riddled with bullet holes, and a young widow with a shotgun in her trembling hands. Her name was Kate Brennan, and on the day I met her, she'd already decided to die. The dust from the outlaws' retreat hadn't yet settled when Catherine Brennan lowered the Remington 12 gauge, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. Behind her, the ranch house stood like a wounded thing, its walls punctured by rifle fire, windows shattered, the door hanging crooked on damaged hinges. 3 days. It had been only 3 days since she'd laid William in the hard ground behind the house they'd built together, and already the vultures were circling. But these vultures wore spurs and carried guns. Kate was 26 years old. She'd buried her father Henry to typhoid fever the winter before, then watched the same sickness take her husband of 8 months this past week. The ranch sprawled across 300 acres of Arizona territory, filed legal under the Homestead Act of 1862. Her father had proven up the claim after 5 years of backbreaking work, building the structure, filing the paperwork in Prescott, doing everything the law required. The deed was legitimate, her ownership was legal, and none of that mattered one damn bit to Silas Garrett and his gang. "3 days, Mrs. Brennan," Silas had called out from his big roan stallion, his voice carrying across the dusty yard with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "We'll be back in 3 days. Then this land becomes ours." 6 riders had sat their horses in a loose semicircle, blocking any escape. 6 men with rifles and hard eyes and the kind of casual violence that comes from knowing the law is too far away to matter. They'd fired into the house as a demonstration, bullets punching through wood and glass, destroying in seconds what had taken months to build. Then they'd ridden off, leaving her alive as a calculated cruelty, because a dead woman can't suffer, can't lie awake at night knowing they're coming back, can't taste the bitter ash of inevitable defeat. Kate dragged herself inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. The interior of the house looked like a battlefield. William's favorite chair had a hole blown through the back. The china cabinet her mother had shipped from Boston lay in pieces. The wedding quilt she'd sewn with such hope now bore the scars of violence. She moved through the destruction in a daze, her mind already making lists with the grim efficiency of survival. The wagon was still serviceable. Shadow, William's Appaloosa stallion, could be sold to Marcus Hartwell for a fair price. The cattle, the tools, the chickens, everything had value if she could just get to town before Garrett came back. The packed bags sat by the door, ready for morning. Inside them, her mother's silver hairbrush, the only thing left of the woman who died when Kate was 8. Her father's Waltham pocket watch, the railroad-grade gold-filled case, still keeping perfect time even though the man who'd carried it was dust. And William's letters, the ones he'd written during their brief courtship, tied with a blue ribbon she'd never have the heart to untie again. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty house, to William's ghost that lingered in every corner. "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this alone." The words tasted like betrayal. That night, sleep stayed a stranger. Kate lay in the bed where William had drawn his last breath, staring at moonlight filtering through the curtains her mother had sewn decades ago. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its cry mournful and lonely. She understood that sound, understood the ache of calling for something that would never answer back. Dawn came with the reluctance of a mourner approaching a grave. Kate, dressed in her traveling clothes, braided her chestnut hair with fingers that had finally stopped shaking, and began the work of loading the wagon. The livestock would need to be driven to town. 23 head of cattle worth maybe $15 to $20 each if she could find a buyer. 4 horses including Shadow, who alone was valued at $150. The chickens could be crated and sold for pennies, but pennies added up when you had nothing. The Studebaker farm wagon creaked as she hitched her mare to it. Shadow followed on a lead, his black coat gleaming with those distinctive white spots on his haunches. The stallion had been William's pride, bred from cavalry stock with the kind of steady temperament that made him worth his weight. Parting with him would be like cutting off her own hand, but sentiment didn't pay for stage tickets to St. Louis. She was securing the last of her belongings when dust appeared on the eastern horizon. Kate's blood turned to ice water. Her hands, finally steady after a sleepless night, began trembling again. The Garrett gang, returning early. She'd gambled on having until afternoon, maybe evening. Should have known better. Men like Silas Garrett didn't follow schedules. They followed opportunity. There was no time to run. The 12 miles to Copper Ridge might as well have been 100. They'd overtake her on the open road, and then there'd be no witnesses, no possibility of help, just her corpse left for the buzzards and a claim filed by a man with faster guns. Kate grabbed the Remington from the wagon bed and positioned herself on the porch. If this was her last stand, she'd make it count. The shotgun held 2 shells of double-aught buckshot, 9 pellets per shell, effective out to 40 yards. She had 73 more shells in the house, and every intention of using them all before she let Silas Garrett take what her father and husband had died protecting. The dust cloud grew closer. Kate's finger rested on the trigger guard, her breath coming short and shallow. This was it, the end of the story. 26 years old and about to die for 300 acres of Arizona dirt. Then the dust resolved into only 2 riders, not 6. And something about the lead rider's posture, the way he sat his horse with calm authority, made her hesitate. The man raised one hand high, the universal gesture of peace. His companion did the same. They slowed their mounts to a walk, approaching with deliberate caution. "That's close enough," Kate called when they were within earshot, her voice steadier than she felt. The Remington stayed trained on the lead rider's chest. Both men reined to a stop. The leader was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing the dust of hard travel like a second skin. His hat was brown and sweat-stained, his clothes faded denim and leather, practical garments worn by someone who lived in them. But it was his face that caught her attention. Weathered by sun and wind, creased at the eyes, but somehow gentle despite the hardness. And those eyes, blue as a summer sky boy, held steady on hers without threat or challenge. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and carrying but not loud, "we don't mean any harm. Name's Cole Matheson. This here's my brother Ryan. We're United States Marshals." "I've got nothing but your word on that," Kate replied, not lowering the shotgun. She'd learned in the past week that words were cheap as dirt and twice as common. The man called Cole reached slowly into his vest, moving with the kind of deliberate care that came from understanding how fear made people dangerous. He pulled out a silver badge, the metal catching the morning light. The stars sat within a circle, and even at this distance Kate could make out the engraving, Deputy United States Marshal, District of Arizona. "Would it help if I rode up closer so you could see this proper?" Cole asked. Kate hesitated, weighing options, then nodded once. "Just you. Your brother stays put." Cole Matheson approached alone, his horse moving at an easy walk. As he drew nearer, Kate could see the details her desperation had missed. He was probably 34, maybe 35, with wheat-colored hair visible beneath his hat. His face bore the marks of a hard profession, but his eyes remained kind. A Colt single-action Army revolver rode his right hip in a well-worn holster, and a Winchester rifle jutted from a saddle scabbard. But his hands stayed visible, nowhere near either weapon. He stopped a few paces from the porch and extended the badge. Kate stepped forward cautiously, keeping the Remington ready, and examined it. The badge was genuine, showing the wear patterns of years of carry. The engraving was crisp and official. Unless Silas Garrett had taken to hiring marshals, these men were legitimate law. They were here yesterday, Kate said finally, lowering the shotgun slightly. 6 of them. Silas Garrett and his gang said they'd be back to claim what's mine. Something hardened in Cole Matheson's expression, a flash of recognition at the name that came and went so quickly she almost missed it. Then we're not far behind. Did they say when they'd return? They didn't need to. Kate gestured at the packed wagon, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Soon enough to stop me from leaving, I expect. Cole looked past her to the bullet-riddled house, taking in the destruction with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too much violence. When his gaze returned to her face, something in it had softened further. You're abandoning your home. It wasn't quite a question, and somehow that made it worse, like he could see straight through her to the shame burning in her gut. I'm alone, Kate said simply. My husband died last week, my father before him. I can't defend this place by myself against 6 armed killers. No, ma'am, I don't expect you could. A flicker of something, sympathy maybe, crossed his weathered face. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Brennan, Kate Brennan. Mrs. Brennan. Cole replaced his hat, settling it with unconscious habit. If you're willing, I'd like to ask for your help. My brother and I have been tracking Silas Garrett's gang for 8 months, all the way from Texas. If they're planning to return here, it might be our best chance to apprehend them. Kate couldn't quite process what she was hearing. Apprehend them? There are 6 of them, armed to the teeth and mean as rattlesnakes. They'll kill you both. A ghost of a smile touched Cole's lips, there and gone like smoke. We've faced worse odds, ma'am, and we wouldn't be asking you to fight, just to stay, at least for another day or two. Make it look like you haven't gone anywhere. You'd be bait, essentially, but you'd be safe. We'd make sure of it. Bait. The word tasted bitter on Kate's tongue. You want to use me as bait to catch 6 killers. We want to use your situation, Cole corrected gently. The fact that they believe you're alone and vulnerable. But I give you my word as a marshal and as a man, no harm will come to you while I'm breathing. There was something in his voice, a bedrock certainty that made her want to believe him. Kate glanced at the packed wagon again, symbol of her surrender, then back at the house that contained everything her family had built. William had made her promise, in those final fever-bright moments, that she'd hold on to their dream, that she wouldn't let anyone take it. But holding on required being alive to do the holding. How do I know I can trust you? She asked. Cole met her gaze without flinching. You don't, but I give you my word, and it's all I have to offer, along with the truth that if you leave now, Garrett will take this land anyway, file a false claim, forge some documents, and by the time it's sorted out in Prescott, he'll have possession. But if you stay and we bring him in, he faces trial for bank robbery and murder. The land stays yours, legal and clear. Kate looked into those steady blue eyes and saw something she recognized. Integrity, the real kind that costs something to maintain. She'd seen it in her father, in William. The kind of bone-deep decency that made a man keep his word even when breaking it would be easier. One day, she said finally, surprised by the firmness in her own voice, if they don't show by tomorrow evening, I'm leaving. Relief washed visible across Cole's face. That's fair, ma'am. More than fair. Thank you. If we're going to risk our lives together, Kate said, formalities seem foolish. Call me Kate. Kate, Cole repeated, and the way her name sounded in his mouth made something flutter in her chest that she immediately suppressed. William wasn't even cold in his grave. She had no business noticing how another man said her name. You and your brother should come inside, she said, turning toward the house before he could see the flush creeping up her neck. I'll make coffee and you can explain your plan. Ryan Matheson rode up as his brother dismounted. He was younger, maybe 29 or 30, with the same wheat-colored hair, but sharper features. Handsome in a dangerous way, with the kind of easy confidence that spoke of skill with the weapon on his hip. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Ma'am, mighty kind of you to help us." "I haven't helped you yet," Kate replied, though without bite. "Let's see if your plan has any merit first." Inside, the house felt different with two large men filling the space. They moved respectfully, aware they were guests in a home recently touched by grief. Kate busied herself at the cast-iron stove with the coffee pot, grateful for the simple task. It gave her hands something to do besides shake. "You've been tracking these men since Texas?" she asked as she worked. Cole nodded, settling into one of the kitchen chairs William had built. The sight of another man in that seat sent a pang through her, but she forced it down. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford until she was safely on a stage heading east. "They robbed a bank in El Paso this past February," Cole explained. "Killed 3 people, bank manager, a deputy, and a civilian who tried to intervene. Since then, they have left a trail of holdups and murders across New Mexico territory. Last count put their victims at 11. "Silas fancies himself some kind of revolutionary," Ryan added, leaning against the wall near the window with the casual alertness of a man accustomed to watching his back. "Claims he's fighting against the railroads and big cattle companies, but he's nothing but a killer dressing up his greed in fancy words." Kate set cups of tin before them, the rich aroma of coffee filling the kitchen. No sugar, she couldn't afford such luxuries anymore. "And you think you can take 6 men with just the 2 of you?" "3, Cole corrected, meeting her eyes over the rim of his cup. "If you count yourself. I told you I won't fight. And I don't expect you to. But we need someone inside the house. Someone they can see, going about normal business. They need to believe you're alone and vulnerable. That's the trap." The plan, as Cole outlined it, was elegant in its simplicity. Kate would continue her daily routine as if nothing had changed. The marshals would position themselves in hiding, Ryan in the barn, where the loft provided both elevation and cover. Cole in the root cellar that opened from outside the house. When the Garrett gang arrived, they'd let them approach close, thinking Kate was alone and helpless. Then the marshals would emerge and catch them in a crossfire. "It's risky," Kate said when he finished. "If they see either of you before you're ready, or if they decide to shoot first and talk later." "That's why we need your help," Cole replied. "You'll be our eyes. When you see them coming, signal us. A lamp in the east window. That'll give us time to get in position." Kate looked down at her hands, which had finally stopped their constant trembling. Part of her, the part raised by a father who believed in standing your ground, wanted to help these men bring justice to those who threatened her home. Another part, the widow who'd already lost too much, wanted nothing more than to be on the eastbound stage by nightfall. "If I do this," she said slowly, "and if by some miracle we succeed, what happens after? The Garrett gang isn't the only threat out here. There will be others." Cole set down his coffee cup with careful precision. "That's a decision for another day. But I promise you this. If we take down Silas Garrett and his men, word will spread. People will think twice before troubling you. Unless they think a woman alone is easy prey regardless." Silence fell over the kitchen. Kate hadn't meant to sound so bitter, but the words had escaped before she could cage them. "You're right," Cole said finally, his honesty cutting through the tension. "It's not fair that you should have to fight to keep what's rightfully yours. But that's the territory for you. Fair doesn't enter into it much." Ryan shifted by the window, his voice sharp with warning. "Someone's coming. Single rider from the east." Kate's heart leapt into her throat, but Cole was already moving, smooth and fast despite his size. He gestured to his brother, and both men slipped out the back door with surprising silence, disappearing into hiding as a buggy came into view on the road. Kate recognized the silhouette immediately and felt relief wash through her. "It's Doc Harrison. He promised to check on me after—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Don't mention us unless you're certain he can be trusted," Cole said quietly from the doorway before vanishing completely. Doc Samuel Harrison was 62 years old, with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He'd been the physician in Copper Ridge since before Kate was born. Had, in fact, delivered her into the world, treated her mother's final pneumonia, and held her hand through both her father's death and William's. If there was anyone in Arizona Territory Kate could trust, it was Doc Harrison. He climbed down from his buggy with the stiffness of a man whose joints complained about the work, carrying his battered black medical bag. When he took her hands in his weathered ones, Kate felt tears threaten for the first time since the gang's visit. "How are you holding up, child?" "I'm managing," Kate said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Inside, Doc's observant eyes took in the packed bags by the door immediately. "Going somewhere?" Kate hesitated. Trust was a complicated thing, earned over years but tested in moments. She'd known Doc Harrison her entire life. If anyone deserved the truth, it was him. "The Garrett gang paid me a visit yesterday," she said quietly. "Said they'd be back to claim the ranch." Doc's bushy eyebrows drew together in a frown. "Those devils! Sheriff Holden should be out here protecting you." "Sheriff Holden is more interested in protecting the saloon's whiskey supply," Kate replied with the kind of dry humor that came from having no illusions left. Buck Holden wore a badge, but only because it came with political appointments and a salary. Actual law enforcement seemed to bore him. "What will you do?" Doc asked. Kate made her decision. "Some help has arrived. 2 U.S. Marshals. They're here tracking the gang." Relief transformed Doc's face. "Thank the Lord. The Matheson brothers?" Kate nodded, surprised he knew the name. "I've heard of them," Doc said, settling into a chair with the ease of an old family friend. "Cole Matheson especially. Methodical, patient man. Tracked the Clanton gang for 2 years before bringing them in. And his brother Ryan, they say he's one of the fastest guns in Arizona Territory." The validation eased something in Kate's chest. "They want me to stay. Act as bait while they ambush the gang." "And what do you want, Kate?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? Since William's death, she'd been operating on pure survival instinct, focused only on getting through each day. Once seemed like luxuries reserved for people who had the space to dream. "I want," she began, then stopped. Swallowed. Tried again. "I want to not be afraid anymore. I want to honor what William and my father built here. I want to believe there's still something worth fighting for." Doc's eyes softened. "Then I think you have your answer, child." They talked for another 20 minutes, Doc promising to return the next day with medical supplies in case of injuries. When he finally prepared to leave, he paused at the door, one hand on her shoulder. "I've already watched your father die, Kate, and your husband. Don't make me bury you too." After his buggy disappeared down the road, Kate gave the all-clear signal. The marshals emerged from their hiding places, Cole from the root cellar dusting earth from his clothes, Ryan from the barn still alert and watching. "Doc Harrison knows who you are," Kate told them. "Says you have a reputation for being good men." Cole and Ryan exchanged a glance. "Good or bad?" Ryan asked. "Good. He seems to think you can actually do this." "That makes one of us," Ryan muttered, though there was a glint in his eye that suggested he was more confident than he let on. Kate looked directly at Cole, her voice steady. "Doc also told me something interesting. He said Silas Garrett was one of 5 men who killed your father during a bank robbery in Tyler, Texas 6 years ago, that you've been tracking him specifically, that this is personal for you." Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. Just nodded once. "Does that change your trust in me?" he asked quietly. Kate studied him, the way he stood, the way he met her eyes without flinching, the careful control in every movement. This was a man who'd learned to master himself, who understood the difference between justice and vengeance, even if the lines sometimes blurred. "Should it?" she countered. "Yes," Cole said with brutal honesty. "A man with vengeance in his heart can be dangerous, make poor decisions, get people killed. I'm asking you to trust that I'm still a marshal first. That justice is what I'm here for, not revenge." Ryan pushed away from the wall. "My brother's been offered the chance to kill Silas Garrett 3 times in the past 6 years. Could have made it look like self-defense. He brought him in for trial each time, because the warrants weren't federal. This time they are. This time it's legal and clean." Kate made her decision based not on words, but on the way Cole looked at her. Direct, honest, hiding nothing. "I trust you, Cole Matheson." Not because Doc vouches for you, but because you just told me the truth when a lie would have been easier. Something eased in Cole's shoulders. Thank you. The afternoon passed in tense preparation. Cole walked the property perimeter, studying sight lines and approaches with the methodical attention of someone whose life had often depended on such details. Ryan reinforced positions in the barn, clearing hay bales to create firing lanes while maintaining cover. Kate cooked a simple meal with what she had: beans, salt pork, cornbread. Working with ingredients was easier than thinking about what tomorrow might bring. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat at the kitchen table to eat. The meal was quiet, punctuated only by the scrape of spoons on tin plates and the occasional comment about positioning or timing. "How long have you been a marshal?" Kate asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 6 years, Cole replied. "Since right after my father was killed. Ryan joined up 3 years ago." "What made you choose that life?" Cole's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed something haunted in their depths. "Same thing that drives most men to pick up a badge, I reckon. Saw too much injustice and decided to do something about it." "Our father was a blacksmith in Missouri," Ryan added. "Good man, honest, worked hard, got killed in a bank robbery that went wrong. Cole was 28, I was 23. The marshal who tracked down the killers showed us there was a way to fight back that didn't involve becoming outlaws ourselves." Kate thought of her own losses, of the weight of grief and the need to make meaning from it. "I understand that, the need to make something good from something terrible." Cole held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of shared wounds and the different ways people learn to carry them. "We should get some rest," he said finally, breaking the connection. "They'll likely come at dawn when they think you'll be most vulnerable." Kate offered them the bedroom, but Cole refused with a shake of his head. "No, ma'am, you take your room. Ryan and I will take shifts keeping watch out here. Need to stay alert." "Wake me for the last shift," Kate insisted. "I won't sleep much anyway." In the bedroom, Kate undressed slowly, her mind churning through everything that had happened. Just that morning, she'd been prepared to abandon her home, to admit defeat, and slink away with whatever she could carry. Now she found herself involved in a dangerous gambit to capture the very men who'd driven her to desperation. And then there was Cole Matheson. She'd noticed things about him that a widow of 3 days had no business noticing. The way his presence filled a room without dominating it. The calm confidence that made her feel safer than she had in weeks. The careful way he moved, economical and precise, like every action had been considered and found necessary. When he looked at her, really looked at her, she felt seen in a way she hadn't experienced since William fell ill. It was inappropriate, shameful even. William was barely in his grave, and here she was noticing another man's steady gaze, the way his rare smile transformed his weathered face, the warmth of his hand when he'd briefly squeezed hers in promise. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, sliding beneath the quilt. "He's here to do it, nothing more." But sleep, when it finally came in fitful snatches, brought dreams of blue eyes and gentle voices, and the impossible promise of safety in a world that had taught her how quickly safety could be torn away. A hand on her shoulder brought her awake with her body tensing for violence. "Easy," Cole's voice came low in the darkness. "It's just me. Dawn's approaching. Thought you'd want to be up." Kate nodded, heart still hammering, and Cole withdrew. She dressed quickly by the faint pre-dawn light, braiding her hair with practiced fingers. When she emerged, she found Cole standing by the window, his silhouette outlined against the growing light. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. "Already in position," Cole explained without turning. "Thought it best to get set before full light." Kate moved to stand beside him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "And you, shouldn't you be in the root cellar soon?" He turned to face her, his expression solemn in the gray light. "Kate, if anything goes wrong today, there's something you need to know. There's a trap door in the pantry, under that worn rug. Leads down to a storm cellar. William built it, according to the plans I found when I was checking the house last night. It's separate from the root cellar. If things go badly, if Ryan and I fall, you get yourself down there and bar the door from inside. You understand?" Kate blinked in surprise. A trap door? She'd never known, never thought to look beneath that rug she walked over every day. William never mentioned it to me. He probably meant to, was building it as a surprise, a safe place in case raiders came. Didn't get the chance to show you before the fever took him. Cole's voice was gentle, understanding. Will you promise me? If the worst happens, you save yourself. Kate wanted to refuse, wanted to say she wouldn't abandon them, but she'd already made too many promises to dead men. I promise, but only if there's truly no other choice. Cole nodded satisfied, then did something unexpected. He reached out and squeezed her hand, briefly, his calloused palm warm and solid against hers. The touch lasted barely a heartbeat, but burned like a brand. Be careful, Kate. Then he was gone, slipping out the back door toward the root cellar, leaving her alone with the memory of his touch and the growing light of what might be her last day alive. Kate forced herself through her morning routine, each action feeling surreal, building up the fire in the stove, setting coffee to boil, taking grain out to feed the chickens, their soft clucking sounds absurdly normal against the weight of waiting violence, all while her eyes kept scanning the western horizon, watching for the dust that would signal death riding toward her. The sun climbed higher, painting the Arizona landscape in harsh morning light. 8:15 by the kitchen clock, and then she saw it. Dust rising in the distance, moving fast. Multiple riders. Kate's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment that would determine whether she lived or died, whether justice would be served or murder would be rewarded with stolen land. With hands that shook only slightly, she lit the lamp in the east window. The signal. She watched it burn for a moment, this small flame that meant everything, then forced herself to continue her routine. Went outside to hang laundry on the line, close enough to the porch for retreat but visible from the road. Acting the part of the vulnerable widow when inside her chest her heart hammered like a war drum. The dust cloud resolved into distinct shapes. 6 riders, just as before, moving in practice formation. 6 men carrying rifles across their saddles, sitting their horses with the easy confidence of wolves approaching wounded prey. They slowed as they neared the property, spreading out slightly, a tactical maneuver designed to cut off escape routes and establish fields of fire. Whoever had trained them, they'd learned their lessons well. Kate clutched a damp sheet in her hands and forced herself to keep hanging laundry, to act unaware, to be the bait that would draw them close enough for Cole's trap to spring. Silas Garrett rode at the point, tall and imposing on his big roan stallion. At 20 yards, he reined to a stop, and his 5 men fanned out behind him in a crescent of threat. The outlaw leader wore a black duster despite the June heat, his beard thick and graying, his eyes hard with the kind of certainty that came from years of taking what he wanted. "Well, well," Silas called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Widow Brennan's still here. Thought you'd have the sense to leave." Kate straightened, the sheet forgotten in her hands. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "This is private property, Mr. Garrett. I have a legal deed registered at the Territorial Land Office in Prescott." Silas spat tobacco juice into the dirt, the brown stream contemptuous. "Deeds got errors, woman. Your daddy filed wrong coordinates back in '78. Makes the whole claim invalid. Land's open for anyone to file." Kate knew it was a lie. Her father had been meticulous about such things, had hired a proper surveyor, had checked and rechecked every detail. But truth didn't matter when backed by 6 rifles against her 1 shotgun. "My father's filing was verified," she said. "Any errors would be in your favor, not his." Silas grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Don't matter now. Your husband's dead. Your daddy's dead. You can't work 300 acres alone. Better to sell to someone who can use it proper." "I'm not selling." The grin faded from Silas's face like sun behind clouds. "Wasn't asking, widow. Boys, search the house. Find whatever valuables she's got stashed. Then we'll discuss how this property changes hands." 2 of the gang members dismounted, their spurs jangling as they hit the ground. They started toward the house with the casual swagger of men who'd never been told no by anything they couldn't shoot. Kate backed up the porch steps, buying seconds, her mind screaming at Cole and Ryan to move, to act, to save her because she couldn't save herself. The shot came from the barn like thunder breaking. One of the mounted gang members jerked in his saddle and tumbled sideways, hitting the ground hard and not moving. At the same moment, the root cellar door burst open and Cole Matheson emerged with his Colt already firing, the report sharp and definitive in the morning air. The outlaw reaching for the porch grabbed his shoulder and spun away, blood spreading across his shirt. United States Marshals, Cole's voice carried like a judge pronouncing sentence. Drop your weapons. Chaos erupted. The remaining gang members scattered like startled quail, diving for cover behind their horses, behind the water trough, anywhere that might stop a bullet. Return fire came in a ragged volley, bullets splintering porch posts and kicking up dust in angry spurts. Kate dropped to the porch floor and crawled toward the door, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Inside, she grabbed the Remington from behind the door, her earlier promise not to fight forgotten in the face of survival. Through the broken window, she could see Ryan in the barn loft, his Winchester working with mechanical precision. Each shot deliberate, aimed, professional. Cole had moved from the root cellar to the big oak tree, using its 3-foot trunk as cover, while he traded shots with Silas and another outlaw. The technical details Kate's father had taught her came flooding back. Ryan's Winchester held 15 rounds and could fire them all in under 20 seconds if needed. Cole's Colt held 6 shots with the hammer down on an empty chamber for safety. Effective range maybe 50 yards. Her Remington, loaded with double-aught buckshot, would be devastating under 40 yards but useless beyond that. One of the gang members broke from cover, making a desperate run toward the side of the house, trying to flank them, to get inside where Kate crouched. She raised the Remington, tracking his movement through the window, her father's voice in her head. Lead the target, don't jerk the trigger. Smooth, squeeze. She fired. The recoil slammed her shoulder. Through the smoke, she saw the man stagger, saw him fall face first into the dirt and go still. Kate stared at what she'd done, at the life she'd just ended, and felt nothing. No horror, no regret, just the cold calculation of survival. She reloaded with shaking hands. Outside, the gunfight intensified. Ryan had hit another gang member's horse, and the animal went down screaming, pinning its rider. Cole advanced from his position, moving with purpose toward better cover. The odds were shifting. 2 gang members down, 1 wounded, 1 pinned. That left Silas and 1 other still fighting. Then Cole jerked and went down. Kate saw it through the window, saw the way his left leg gave out, saw him roll behind the oak tree, but his position was compromised now, exposed. Blood soaked his pants leg almost immediately. And Silas Garrett saw it too, saw opportunity, and advanced from behind the water trough with his revolver raised for a killing shot. Kate didn't think, didn't hesitate. She raised the Remington and fired through the broken window at 35 yards, right at the edge of the shotgun's effective range. The spread pattern caught Silas in his right side. Not fatal, but enough to stagger him, to spin him around. His murderous gaze fixed on the house, on her, and he fired. The bullet splintered the doorframe inches from where she crouched. She could feel the wind of its passage. "You're dead, woman," Silas roared, limping toward the porch, death in his eyes and a gun in his hand. Kate fumbled with the reload, her hands suddenly clumsy, shells slipping through her fingers. He was going to reach the door before she could chamber another round. She was going to die in her own kitchen, killed by the same man who had threatened to take everything. The front door crashed open. Kate raised the empty shotgun on pure instinct, knowing it was useless but unable to stop herself. The shot that rang out didn't come from her weapon. Silas Garrett stopped in the doorway, a look of complete surprise crossing his bearded face. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back up at Kate as if trying to understand how she'd shot him with an unloaded gun. Behind him, leaning against the doorframe with his left leg soaked in blood, but his right arm steady as stone, Cole Matheson stood with his Colt still extended. Smoke curled from the barrel in lazy spirals. Silas's legs gave out and he crumpled forward, falling across the threshold like some grim offering. "Kate," Cole gasped, swaying on his good leg. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to form words. "Good," he managed. Then his strength gave out and he collapsed into the kitchen chair, blood pooling on the floor beneath him. Outside, the gunfire had ceased. Ryan's voice carried through the broken windows. "Last 2 surrendering. Hold fire." It was over. 4 gang members dead, including Silas Garrett, 2 wounded and giving up, and Cole Matheson bleeding in her kitchen from saving her life. Kate dropped the shotgun and rushed to his side, her hands already tearing strips from her apron. The bullet had passed clean through his outer thigh, missing the femoral artery by what looked like a quarter inch. If it had hit that artery, he'd be dead in minutes. But it hadn't. By luck or providence or whatever kept good men breathing, it had missed. She poured whiskey from William's medicinal bottle over the wound, not caring about the waste. Cole gritted his teeth but didn't cry out, sweat beading his forehead from the pain. She bound the injury tightly with the torn cloth, her hands steady now that action was required. "This will hurt," she warned. Cole managed a grim smile. "Already does, ma'am." Ryan appeared in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut above his eye but otherwise unharmed. He took in the scene with a quick glance. Silas dead, his brother wounded but alive, Kate Brennan covered in gun smoke and determination. "All accounted for," he reported. "4 dead, 2 wounded. It's done." "Good work, brother," Cole said through gritted teeth. "Not bad yourself," Ryan replied. Then his gaze fell on Kate. "Though it looks like Mrs. Brennan did her share of the fighting, too." Kate looked down at her hands, still covered in blood. Cole's blood, Silas's blood, maybe her own from where she'd scraped her knuckles on something. The life of a woman who'd fired a shotgun at another human being and watched him fall. "I didn't mean to get involved," she said quietly. "It just happened." "Good thing it did," Cole said, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You saved my life, Kate." "You saved mine first," she reminded him. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with recognition. Two people who'd faced death together and come out the other side changed. The sound of hoofbeats and a wagon approaching broke the moment. Within the hour, the yard would fill with Doc Harrison, Sheriff Holden arriving too late to matter, neighbors who'd been too afraid to help before suddenly eager to express their support. The machinery of aftermath would grind into motion, turning violence into reports and testimony and official record. But for now, in the quiet between heartbeats, Kate Brennan stood in her bullet-riddled kitchen and understood something fundamental had shifted. She'd come into this day ready to abandon everything, to run from her fears and her grief and the overwhelming impossibility of surviving alone. She was leaving it as someone else entirely. A woman who'd stood her ground, who'd fought for what was hers, who discovered that sometimes the ending you thought was written could be rewritten with enough courage and the right people standing beside you. And standing beside her, bleeding but alive, was a man with blue eyes and steady hands who'd kept his promise even when it cost him blood. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. On the porch of the Matheson Ranch, old Cole paused in his storytelling, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup gone cold. Thomas sat forward in his chair, the first spark of interest breaking through his grief like dawn through storm clouds. "Grandma shot a man?" Thomas asked, disbelief and something like awe mixing in his voice. Cole's lips quirked in a small smile. "Your grandmother was the strongest person I ever knew, son. That day she became a warrior. But strength isn't just about fighting." He set down his cup, his blue eyes distant with memory. "Real strength is what came after. Any man can pull a trigger when cornered. Takes something else entirely to rebuild when the smoke clears. To choose life over just surviving." "What happened next?" Thomas asked. "What it always happens after battle," Cole replied. "The living tend to the wounded, the dead get buried, and everyone tries to make sense of what just happened." He picked up his cup again, found it cold, and set it back down. "But that day changed everything. For me, for your grandmother, for both of us. Sometimes you don't know you're at a crossroads until you're already standing in the middle of it." The old man's gaze drifted to the horizon, seeing not the well-maintained ranch before him, but a smaller property 30 years gone, and a young woman with gun smoke on her hands learning what it meant to fight for something worth keeping. "Let me tell you about the hardest part, Thomas. The waiting. Because after the gunfire stopped, I had to leave. And your grandmother had to decide if a man she'd known for 2 days was worth hoping for. The hours after the shooting passed in a blur of organized chaos that felt nothing like victory. Doc Harrison arrived first, his buggy rattling into the yard with the kind of speed that suggested he'd heard the gunfire from town 12 miles distant. The old physician took one look at the carnage scattered across Kate's property and went straight to work with the efficient calm of someone who'd seen worse. He examined Cole's leg wound first. probing with gentle fingers while Kate hovered nearby, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. The bullet had passed clean through the outer thigh muscle, missing the femoral artery by a margin Doc described as the width of a prayer. "You're lucky, Marshal," Doc said as he cleaned and stitched the wound with practiced efficiency. 14 stitches total, each one pulling tight, while Cole sat stone-faced and sweating. "Quarter inch to the left, and you'd have bled out before help arrived." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Cole replied through gritted teeth. "Mrs. Brennan's shot saved my life. Staggered Silas just enough to throw off his aim." Doc glanced at Kate with new assessment in his eyes. "You've got your father's steel, child, and apparently his aim." Kate couldn't find words to respond. She stood there in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of violence, blood on her hands, both literal and metaphorical, and felt nothing like the woman who'd woken that morning, ready to abandon everything. She'd killed a man today. Maybe two. She wasn't sure about the one she'd shot through the window. The thought should have horrified her, should have sent her to her knees with guilt and revulsion. Instead, she felt alive, fierce, like something that had been sleeping inside her had finally woken up and bared its teeth. Sheriff Buck Holden arrived 3 hours after the shooting, huffing and red-faced from the ride. He brought 2 deputies and a wagon for the bodies, along with enough bluster to fill a courthouse. He made a great show of inspecting the scene, taking custody of the 2 surviving gang members, and generally acting as if his presence meant something. Cole watched him with barely concealed contempt, his leg elevated and freshly bandaged. "Bit late to the party, Sheriff." "Had to gather my men," Holden blustered. "Can't go riding into a situation without proper backup." "The situation was over 3 hours ago," Ryan pointed out from where he leaned against the wall, a bandage over the cut on his forehead. "Where were you when Mrs. Brennan was being threatened?" Holden's face reddened further, but he had no answer that wouldn't condemn him. He settled for taking official statements, filling out paperwork with exaggerated importance, and promising to hold the prisoners in the Copper Ridge jail well until federal marshals arrived from Prescott. "I'm the federal marshal," Cole said flatly. "I'll transport them when I'm able to ride." The afternoon brought neighbors. Marcus Hartwell arrived first, the wealthy rancher riding in on a magnificent bay gelding worth more than Kate's entire property. He was 46 years old, clean-shaven and well-dressed even for a social call, carrying himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to respect. He'd known Kate's father, had offered Henry Brennan advice and occasionally help over the years. Now he looked at the bullet-riddled house and the dead men being loaded into the wagon with something like approval. "You stood your ground, Kate," he said, dismounting and offering her his hand like they were meeting at a church social instead of a battlefield. "Your father would be proud." "My father would be horrified I had to fight at all," Kate replied, but she took his hand. Marcus had always been kind to her family, in his way. "Perhaps, but he'd be prouder still that you won." Marcus glanced at Cole, who was watching from the porch with the territorial awareness of a wolf protecting its den. "These the marshals who helped?" "Marshal Cole Matheson and his brother Ryan," Kate confirmed. "They tracked the Garrett gang all the way from Texas." Marcus nodded slowly, calculating something behind his shrewd eyes. "You're fortunate they arrived when they did. A lesser woman would have run. A foolish woman would have fought alone and died. You found the third option." He paused, then added, "If you need anything in the coming days, Kate, you know where to find me. Hands to work the property, supplies, whatever you need." Other neighbors came in ones and twos throughout the afternoon. The Peterson family, who farmed 2 miles north. The Dunbars, who ran cattle on the adjacent range. People who'd been notably absent when the Garrett gang was terrorizing the territory suddenly appeared with offers of help and expressions of solidarity now that the danger had passed. Kate understood. They had families to protect, couldn't risk drawing the gang's attention. But understanding didn't make their timing less bitter. By evening, the house finally emptied except for Kate, Cole, and Ryan. Doc Harrison had insisted Cole not be moved until morning at the earliest, when a wagon could transport him to town for proper recovery. Ryan volunteered to sleep in the barn, giving his wounded brother and the woman who'd saved his life privacy that felt both appropriate and charged with something unspoken. Kate changed Cole's bandage as twilight painted the world in shades of purple and gold. The lamplight made his weathered face softer, gentler, though pain still creased the corners of his eyes. She worked with steady hands now. The shaking finally stopped, cleaning away dried blood and checking Doc's stitches with the practical knowledge of a woman raised on the frontier. "You should rest," she said quietly. "You lost a lot of blood." "I'll rest when I'm sure you're safe," Cole replied, watching her work. "The danger's past. Silas is dead. His gang is broken." A slight smile touched Cole's lips. "You're not as helpless as you thought you were this morning." Kate's hand stilled on the bandage. "No, I don't know who that woman was who fired those shots, but I think she's who I needed to become." She finished tying off the clean cloth and sat back, meeting his eyes. "Does that make me terrible? That I don't feel guilty?" "That makes you a survivor," Cole said. You did what needed doing to protect your life and your home. No shame in that." "I thought I'd feel different. Haunted, maybe. Broken by it. Some people are. Some people break the first time they take a life, and they never quite fit back together right." Cole's voice carried the weight of experience. "But you're not some people, Kate Brennan. You're steel wrapped in silk. Your father and husband, they built the foundation. Today you proved you could defend it." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. Kate busied herself with gathering the soiled bandages to hide her reaction. As she stood to dispose of them, Cole caught her hand gently. "Thank you," he said, his calloused palm warm against hers, "for everything." She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his scarred fingers and her smaller ones, and something electric passed between them. Not gratitude, not relief at surviving. Something else. Something that made her breath catch and her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I should let you rest," Kate managed, gently withdrawing her hand, though part of her wanted to let the touch linger. In her bedroom, Kate undressed slowly, her mind replaying not the violence of the day, but that moment of connection. Cole's hand holding hers. The way he looked at her with respect instead of pity, as an equal instead of something to be protected. William had loved her, but William had also sheltered her, made decisions for her benefit without consulting her. Cole spoke to her like a partner. The thought brought a wave of guilt crashing down. William had been dead for less than a week. His body was barely settled in the ground behind the house, and here she was noticing another man's touch. The way his rare smile transformed his face. The calm strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the darkness, to William's ghost that lingered in the corners of their bedroom. "I'm so sorry." But even as she apologized, she knew something had changed. The world had shifted on its axis, and she couldn't shift it back no matter how guilty it made her feel. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by dreams she couldn't quite remember upon waking. When Cole's voice calling her name pulled her from restless slumber, dawn was still an hour away. She found him by the window, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gray. "Thought you should know," he said quietly. "Ryan and I will be leaving this morning. Doc's bringing a wagon to transport me to town, then on to Prescott with the prisoners." Kate's heart sank, though she'd known this moment was coming. "How long will you be gone?" "Hard to say. Need to testify, file reports, see the prisoners through trial. Could be weeks, could be months." He turned to face her, and in the dim light she could see conflict playing across his features. "Kate, there's something I need to show you before I go." He led her to the pantry, moving stiffly on his injured leg, and pulled back the worn rug to reveal the trapdoor he'd mentioned. Kate had lived in this house for over a year and never known it was there. Cole lifted the door, revealing a wooden ladder descending into darkness. "William built this. Must have been working on it in secret, wanting to surprise you. It's a storm cellar, separate from the root cellar outside, stocked with emergency supplies." Kate took the lamp he offered and climbed down carefully. The space was small, maybe 6 feet by 8, the walls lined with stone. Shelves held a water barrel, dry goods, blankets. Everything someone would need to survive a few days if raiders came. And on one shelf, sitting alone like it had been waiting for her, was a small wooden box with her name carved into the lid. Kate's hands trembled as she lifted it. Inside, beneath a layer of oilcloth, lay a letter in William's handwriting. The date at the top read 2 weeks before his death. She climbed back up the ladder, the letter clutched to her chest, and sat at the kitchen table. Cole gave her privacy, moving to the window to stare out at the growing light. Kate broke the seal with shaking fingers and began to read. My dearest Kate, the letter began in William's careful script. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered the shelter I built. I'm sorry I didn't show you before I fell too ill. Doc Harrison told me last week the fever is worsening, that I might not have much time. I wanted to pretend he was wrong, but I can feel death approaching like storm clouds on the horizon. Kate's eyes blurred with tears, but she forced herself to keep reading. I've been preparing for your safety in ways you didn't know. 3 weeks ago, when I rode to Prescott for supplies, I stopped at the Territorial Marshal's office. I filed a request with the Chief Marshal. If anything happened to me, and if outlaws threatened you, could they recommend someone trustworthy to help? Someone with integrity who wouldn't take advantage of a widow's vulnerability. Kate's breath caught. William had known, had prepared for this. The Chief Marshal mentioned Cole Matheson, said he was the most reliable man they had, gave me his description so you'd recognize him if he came. Wheat-colored hair, blue eyes, calm demeanor, carries his father's badge alongside his own. The letter continued. Kate, I met Marshal Matheson once, 3 years ago in Tucson. There was a bank robbery. A deputy had been shot, and I saw Matheson tending the wounded man personally, using his own shirt to stop the bleeding, even though the deputy wasn't expected to survive. That told me everything I needed to know. He's a man who believes in justice, not vengeance. A man who sees people, not just problems to be solved. Kate looked up at Cole's silhouette by the window, seeing him with new understanding. William had known, had chosen him specifically, had trusted him with her life. The letter's final paragraph made tears spill freely down her cheeks. My greatest regret is leaving you alone. My greatest hope is that you find happiness again. Don't grieve too long, my love. You're only 26. You have a lifetime ahead of you. Live fully, Kate. Fight for our land if you can, but not if it costs your life. Leave if you must. Love again if you can. You deserve that. You deserve everything. The last thing I'll ever build is this shelter to keep you safe. Let that be enough. With all my love, William. Kate sat at the table, tears streaming down her face, clutching the letter like a lifeline. The guilt she'd been carrying, the shame of noticing another man, of feeling alive in Cole's presence. All of it washed away in the face of William's generous blessing. He'd known she'd need permission to move forward, had given it with his dying breath, in ink and paper, and the careful construction of a hiding place. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. When she finally looked up, Cole had turned from the window. The lamplight caught the concern in his eyes. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Kate nodded, folding the letter carefully. Yes, better than all right. She didn't explain, wasn't ready to share William's words yet, but something had shifted inside her. Some locked door had opened, and she felt lighter than she had since the fever first struck. Doc Harrison's wagon arrived as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the scarred property in golden light. Ryan emerged from the barn, and together they helped Cole into the wagon bed, cushioned with blankets for the rough ride to town. Kate stood on the porch, watching them prepare to leave, and felt the weight of approaching loss settle over her shoulders. What will you do now? Cole asked from the wagon, his eyes searching her face. Kate looked at the house behind her, at the land stretching in all directions, at everything her family had built and bled for. I think I'll stay. Find a way to work it. Hire help for the heavy tasks. She was surprised by the certainty in her own voice. It won't be easy, but few worthwhile things are. Cole's smile transformed his face, made him look younger despite the pain lines around his eyes. No, ma'am, they aren't. They looked at each other across the growing morning light, and 100 things hung unspoken between them. Kate wanted to ask when she'd see him again, if she'd see him again, wanted to thank him properly for everything he'd done, wanted to understand the connection she felt, this pull toward a man she'd known for 2 days that felt deeper than logic should allow. But Doc was waiting, and Ryan had already mounted his horse, and the moment was slipping away like water through her fingers. If you're ever passing through Copper Ridge again, Kate offered, keeping her voice steady through force of will, you'll always have a place to stay. Ryan touched his hat brim. Mighty kind of you, ma'am. But it was Cole's eyes Kate watched, Cole's reaction she waited for. He held her gaze for a long moment, something serious and intent in his expression. I may take you up on that sooner than you think, he said. Before Kate could ask what he meant, Cole reached out from the wagon. She stepped closer instinctively, and he took her hand in his. Then, with old-fashioned courtesy that made her breath catch, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The touch of his mouth against her skin sent warmth flooding through her that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Time seemed to slow, crystallize around this moment. His blue eyes held hers, serious and steady, and in them she saw promise. Intent. Something that made her pulse race and her thoughts scatter. "Until we meet again, Kate Brennan," Cole said softly, his voice carrying a weight of meaning she was only beginning to understand. Then the wagon was moving, creaking down the dusty road toward Copper Ridge. Ryan rode alongside, and within minutes they disappeared beyond the rise, leaving Kate standing alone on her porch, with her hands still tingling from his kiss. She stood there long after they'd vanished, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered against her ribs. Part of her, a part she'd thought died with William, had awakened at that touch. Stirred to life by a marshal with gentle eyes and careful hands, who'd kept his promise even when it cost him blood. "Foolishness," Kate muttered to herself, finally turning back to the house. "You have work to do. No time for fanciful thoughts about a man whose life is spent chasing outlaws across the territory." But even as she said it, she couldn't stop the smile that touched her lips, couldn't stop the hope that bloomed treacherous and bright in her chest. Couldn't stop watching the road in the days that followed, searching the horizon for dust that might resolve into a familiar silhouette. On the Matheson Ranch porch in 1915, old Cole paused again to sip from his refilled coffee. Thomas was leaning forward now, grief momentarily forgotten in the pull of the story. "You left," Thomas said, almost accusingly. "Why would you leave if you felt that way about her?" Cole's weathered face creased in a smile. "Because, son, feelings aren't enough. I had duties to fulfill, prisoners to deliver, reports to file, and I needed to be certain." He set down his cup. "Needed to know if what I felt was real or just the aftermath of battle, if she felt the same or if gratitude was playing tricks on both our hearts." "So what happened?" 6 months, Thomas. 6 months of duty and distance and doubt, 6 months for your grandmother to build a life without me, to become strong enough that she didn't need anyone. The old man's eyes went distant. And 6 months for me to realize that not needing someone and not wanting them are two very different things. The first 2 weeks after the shooting passed in a blur of activity and official business. Kate gave her statement to the territorial court deputy who rode out from Prescott. She signed documents, answered questions, relived the shooting a dozen times for men in suits who wrote everything down in careful script. The newspapers picked up the story. "Widow defeats outlaw gang," read one headline. "Lady Marshal brings justice to Arizona territory," proclaimed another, getting the facts entirely wrong, but making her briefly famous. Kate hated every minute of the attention. What she didn't hate was the news that arrived 2 weeks after Cole's departure. The territorial newspaper carried the story. Silas Garrett's gang had been formally charged in Prescott. Federal warrants executed. The surviving members would stand trial for bank robbery and murder. And the article praised U.S. Marshals Cole and Ryan Matheson for their months of dedicated pursuit and the successful conclusion to a case that had spanned 3 territories. Kate read the article 3 times, searching between the lines for some personal message that wasn't there. Cole's name in print felt intimate somehow, like she was seeing something private made public. But there was no word from the man himself. No letter, no message passed through Doc Harrison or anyone else. The silence shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. Kate threw herself into rebuilding. The bullet holes in the house needed patching. Windows needed replacing. The emotional weight of what had happened in those walls needed to be scrubbed away with soap and determination. She worked from dawn until exhaustion claimed her, trying not to think about blue eyes and careful hands. 4 weeks after the shooting, she hired help. James and Sarah Mitchell were a young married couple from Copper Ridge, both 22 and desperate for opportunity. James knew cattle and horses, had worked ranches since he was 12. Sarah was practical and strong, unafraid of hard work. Kate offered them a partnership of sorts. They'd live in the small cabin at the edge of the property, help manage the ranch, and split the profits 50-50 after expenses. It was more generous than strictly necessary, But Kate remembered what it felt like to be young and struggling. Remembered William building this place with hope and sweat. If she couldn't have that future for herself, she could at least help others find it. The Mitchells proved worth every penny. James had a way with cattle that bordered on magical, and Sarah became the friend Kate hadn't realized she needed. Someone to talk to during the long days, to share coffee with in the mornings, to laugh with when the work got hard. Summer faded into fall. The cattle went to market and brought fair prices. Kate's bank account, nearly empty after William's medical bills and funeral expenses, began to recover. The ranch was functioning, even thriving in its small way. She'd proven she could do this, could stand on her own, could make a life from land and determination. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow, like she was going through motions, performing the role of successful rancher, while some essential part of her waited for something that might never come. She caught herself watching the eastern road more often than the cattle, scanned the horizon for dust that never resolved into the rider she hoped for. And at night, alone in the bedroom she'd shared briefly with William, she thought about Cole Matheson. Wondered where he was, if his leg had healed properly, if he ever thought about her. If that kiss on her hand had meant what she thought it meant, or if she was a foolish widow reading romance into simple courtesy. September brought Marcus Hartwell riding into her yard on a fine afternoon, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Coffee, flour, sugar, lamp oil. Things that cost money and spoke of thoughtfulness. He tied both horses to the hitching post and approached the porch with the confidence of a man who'd never been refused entrance anywhere. Kate met him with wariness disguised as hospitality. Marcus had been nothing but kind to her family over the years, but she recognized calculation when she saw it, and there was calculation in his eyes now. They sat at the kitchen table, coffee between them, and Marcus wasted no time on pleasantries. "Kate, I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much for games," he began. "I'm proposing a partnership." Kate's eyebrows rose. "A partnership?" "Business, primarily, but marriage if you're willing to consider it." He held up a hand to forestall her immediate protest. "Hear me out. I'm 46 years old, been a widower for 3 years since Margaret died in childbirth. I'm not a romantic man, Kate, never have been, but I'm a practical one, and practicality says we could help each other." He laid out his proposition with the care of a man presenting a business contract. His 5,000 acres, combined with her 300, would make them one of the largest operations in the territory. She'd have financial security, social position, protection from men who might see a woman alone as easy prey. He'd have companionship, someone capable to help manage the growing enterprise, and perhaps children if God willed it. "I respect you," Marcus concluded. "Always have. You're intelligent, strong, capable. We'd be partners in truth, not just in name. You'd have a say in all decisions. Your property would remain legally yours. I'm offering security, Kate. Safety. A future without constant worry." It was the most generous proposal Kate had ever heard. Marcus was everything a sensible woman should want. Wealthy, respected, kind in his way. He offered a life of comfort and stability, of influence and achievement. She could help other widows, other struggling families, could make a real difference with the resources and social standing marriage to Marcus Hartwell would bring. And she felt absolutely nothing when she looked at him. "I need time to think," Kate said carefully, not wanting to insult a man who'd been nothing but decent to her. "Of course," Marcus stood gathering his hat. "Take a month, 2 months, whatever you need. But Kate, don't wait too long. Winter's coming, and winters are hard for people alone." At the door he paused. "I heard that Marshal Matheson took an assignment in New Mexico territory, tracking some gang of cattle rustlers. Man like that, the job is his life. He'll chase outlaws until one of them gets lucky or he gets old. Don't pin your hopes on someone who's already gone." The words hit like a physical blow, but Kate kept her face carefully neutral. "Thank you for the supplies, Marcus, and for your honesty." After he left, Kate sat on the porch and forced herself to think practically. Marcus was offering everything sensible. Cole Matheson was a dream, a maybe, a man who'd kissed her hand 6 weeks ago and not sent word since. She was 26 years old, alone on 300 acres with winter approaching and no guarantee of anything beyond tomorrow. The smart choice was obvious. But when Kate closed her eyes, she didn't see Marcus's clean-shaven face and tailored suits. She saw blue eyes and sun-weathered skin, felt the gentle pressure of lips against her knuckles, heard a deep voice promising to keep her safe while he was breathing. Sarah Mitchell found her there an hour later, staring at nothing. The younger woman sat without asking, the comfortable silence of friendship between them. Marcus Hartwell just left, Sarah observed. He proposed. Sarah's eyes widened. Marriage. Partnership, technically. But yes, marriage is part of it. Kate looked at her friend. He's offering everything practical, everything sensible. But when I look at him, I feel nothing. And when I think about... Kate stopped, unsure how to finish. The Marshal, Sarah supplied gently. You're thinking about Marshall Matheson. There was no point denying it. Am I being foolish, waiting for a man I knew for 2 days, who might never come back? Sarah was quiet for a moment, her young face serious. My James, we had nothing when we married. Still don't, really, except what you've generously given us. But every morning I wake up happy. Every time I see him, my heart does this little jump. That's worth more than all Marcus Hartwell's land. She paused. But I can't tell you what to worry, Doris. Only you know what you can live with. October brought the first hints of winter, cold mornings and early frost that killed the last of the summer wildflowers. Kate gave Marcus her answer on a cool afternoon, meeting him on neutral ground in town rather than her property. I'm honored by your proposal, she said carefully, choosing words that wouldn't wound. You're a good man, Marcus. Any woman would be fortunate to marry you. But my heart isn't ready. I need to stand on my own first, prove to myself I can. Marcus took it better than she expected, his disappointment visible but controlled. I understand. The offer stands, Kate. If you change your mind, or if that Marshal proves to be the fool I think he is, my door is open. Thank you for everything. As she walked away, Kate felt relief wash through her. She'd made her choice, chosen uncertainty over security, hope over practicality. It might be the stupidest decision she'd ever made, but it was hers. November brought doubt creeping in like fog. 5 months since Cole left, and still no word. Kate began to think Marcus had been right, that she'd built a fantasy from 2 days of crisis and a hand kiss that probably meant nothing more than old-fashioned courtesy, that Cole Matheson was chasing outlaws in New Mexico or California or anywhere but here, not thinking about her at all. She tried not to watch the road, failed constantly. The first real snow came in late November, unusual for Arizona territory but not unheard of. Kate and the Mitchells worked to secure the livestock, reinforce the barn against the weight of accumulation, stock supplies for a hard winter. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, kept her from dwelling on might-have-beens and probably nevers. December arrived bitter and cold. Kate spent a morning baking bread, taking comfort in the simple rhythm of kneading dough, the warmth of the oven, the rich yeast smell filling the kitchen. Her hands were chapped from winter work, her back ached from hauling water when the pipes froze, and she'd never felt more capable in her life. She'd built this, not by herself, not entirely, but she'd done the work, had stood her ground, faced down death, pulled a trigger when necessary, and rebuilt from ashes. William would be proud, her father would be proud, and she was proud of herself, regardless of whether Cole Matheson ever rode back into her life. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up from her bread dough. Kate's heart, carefully guarded for months, began to pound. She moved to the window, wiping flour from her hands on her apron, hardly daring to hope. Through the falling snow, a lone rider approached, broad-shouldered silhouette familiar even at distance. Moving slow through the snow, his horse's breath visible in the cold air. As he drew closer, Kate could see he wore a heavy coat against the winter chill, his hat pulled low, his hair longer than she remembered. He looked tired, like he'd been riding for days. Cole Matheson had come back. Kate's hands trembled as she untied her apron and hung it by the stove. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch into the cold. Snow dusted her shoulders immediately, but she barely felt it. Cole dismounted slowly, tied his horse to the post with the careful movements of someone whose body was protesting the journey. When he removed his hat and looked up at her, his blue eyes were exactly as she remembered. Maybe softer, maybe more uncertain. Ma'am, he said, his voice rough from cold or disuse. I hope I'm not intruding. Kate couldn't help the laugh that escaped, part relief and part disbelief. After 6 months, that's what you're worried about? Intruding? A smile flickered across his weathered face. Wanted to give you proper warning before I showed up on your doorstep. Sent a letter 2 weeks ago, but I don't know if it arrived before me. No letter came. Kate wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. But you're here now. I am. He climbed the porch steps, moving with just a trace of stiffness in his left leg. Close enough now that she could see the new lines around his eyes, the silver starting at his temples. May I come in? There's something I need to say, and I'd rather not say it while freezing. Kate stepped back, letting him into the warmth of the kitchen. The door closed behind him, shutting out the winter wind, and suddenly the space felt smaller. More intimate, charged with 6 months of absence and all the things they hadn't said. Coffee? Kate offered, moving to the stove because she needed something to do with her hands. Please. She poured 2 cups, set one before him at the table, and forced herself to sit, to meet his eyes, to not let hope run wild before she knew why he was here. You've been in New Mexico, she said. Not a question. Marcus's information had been accurate, after all. For a time, cattle rustlers operating along the territorial border. Case took longer than expected. Cole wrapped his hands around the warm cup. But that's not why I'm here, Kate. I didn't ride through a snowstorm to talk about work. Then why did you ride through a snowstorm? Cole met her eyes directly, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. You. I came for you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Kate's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. I don't understand, she managed. I couldn't stop thinking about you, Cole said, his voice steady, but his hands tightening on the cup. Every day for 6 months. Tried to convince myself it was gratitude, or the bond that forms between people who face death together. Tried to tell myself I'd built something up in my head that wouldn't survive reality. But it didn't go away, Kate. If anything, it got stronger. He set down the cup, leaned forward slightly. I wanted to come back sooner. Had obligations to fulfill first. Prisoners to deliver, reports to file, testimonies to give. And I needed to be sure that what I felt was real. Sure that you might feel the same. Sure that I wasn't just a man grateful for his life looking for meaning in the woman who helped save it. And are you sure now? Kate asked quietly. Yes. No hesitation. I've had 6 months to think about it, Kate. About what I want for the rest of my life. About what kind of man I want to be. And the answer keeps coming back to this place. To you, to the hope that maybe, possibly, you might give me a chance to prove myself. But Kate's hands shook as she set down her own cup. Prove yourself? Cole, you saved my life. Kept your promise even when it cost you blood. What more could you possibly need to prove? That was duty. I'm talking about something else entirely now. He stood, moved around the table until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Kate, I'm asking for permission to court you, if you'll have me. I know it hasn't been long since William passed. I know I'm just a man who showed up at your worst moment, and now I'm back asking for more. But I had to try. Kate stood too, close enough now that she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was trying to keep controlled. Cole, I need to tell you something about William. She retrieved the letter from where she kept it in her bureau, brought it back, and handed it to him. Read this. Cole read William's words while Kate watched emotions play across his face. Understanding. Sorrow for a good man lost too soon, and something that looked like relief. He chose you specifically, Kate said when he finished. Set everything in motion before he died. Gave me permission to move forward with his blessing. I've been carrying guilt for months about feeling something for you, and all along, William had planned for this. Cole folded the letter carefully and handed it back. He loved you very much. He did, and I loved him. Still do in a way. Kate met Cole's eyes. But he gave me permission to live, Cole. To love again if I could. And I think... She paused, gathering courage. I think I'd very much like for you to court me. The smile that broke across Cole's face was like sunrise after a long night. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. I've purchased land, he said, 12 miles east of here, 640 acres with a year-round creek. Plan to build a house come spring. Start raising cattle like I talked about that morning and after the shooting. I'm done chasing outlaws, Kate. Done living out of saddlebags. I want roots, a home, a life that doesn't revolve around the next warrant. What about Ryan? Took a deputy position in Tucson. Says town life suits him better than the open range. Cole squeezed her hands gently. I know this is fast. I know I'm asking a lot. But I'm here, Kate. I came back like I promised. Sooner than you thought. Just like I said. Kate laughed, remembering his words from 6 months ago. You did say that. I keep my promises. They stood there in the warm kitchen, hands joined, snow falling outside the window, and Kate felt something settle into place. This was right. It felt right in a way nothing had felt right since William died. Not comfortable or safe, but real, alive. Like the world had finally started turning again after months of standing still. Stay for dinner, she said. We have a lot to talk about. Cole's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. That evening, as twilight painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of blue and purple, they talked 4 hours. About his months in New Mexico, about her building the ranch into something viable, about his plans for his land, her hopes for the future, the careful negotiation of 2 lives figuring out how they might fit together. When Cole finally prepared to leave, promising to return the next day, he paused at the door. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world clean and new. Kate walked him out to the porch, neither of them rushing the goodbye. Kate, Cole said, turning to face her in the lamplight spilling from the doorway, I've thought about this moment for 6 months, about what I'd say if I ever got the chance. And what did you decide? That words aren't enough. He stepped closer, moving slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused palm gentle against her skin. Kate's breath caught as his thumb brushed across her cheekbone. May I? He asked softly. In answer, Kate rose on her toes and closed the distance between them. Cole's lips met hers in a kiss that was nothing like his courtly gesture 6 months ago. This was deeper, more certain, a claim and a promise all at once. His free hand came to rest at the small of her back, drawing her closer, and Kate's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss lasted forever and no time at all. When they finally parted, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I'll come back tomorrow, he said quietly. You'd better. Kate stood on the porch long after he'd ridden into the darkness, one hand pressed to her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Something that had been sleeping inside her for months, maybe years, had finally woken fully. Not just survival, not just getting through each day, but the possibility of something more, something worth hoping for. Inside, she moved through her evening routine with a lightness she hadn't felt in ages. The house felt warmer somehow, more alive. She was humming as she banked the fire for the night, actually humming, and the sound surprised a laugh from her own throat. In her bedroom, Kate caught sight of herself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but something in her expression had changed. The woman looking back at her was stronger than the terrified widow who'd been ready to abandon everything. But she was also softer than the battle-hardened survivor who'd pulled a trigger without hesitation. She was something new entirely. Someone who'd faced loss and violence and grief and chosen to keep living anyway. Chosen hope over despair. Chosen the possibility of love even when it meant risking her heart again. Thank you, Kate whispered to the room, to William's memory, to whatever forces had brought Cole Matheson to her door twice now. Thank you for giving me this chance. Tomorrow Cole would return, and the day after that, and slowly, carefully, they would build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. Not a replacement for what she'd had with William, but something different. Something earned through blood and determination and the courage to believe that endings could also be beginnings. Kate slipped beneath the quilts with a smile on her face and hope warming her chest. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside she was warm, safe. And for the first time in months, she was genuinely excited to see what tomorrow would bring. The story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. On the porch of the Matheson Ranch, Thomas leaned forward in his chair, the afternoon sun warming his shoulders. For the first time since Emma's death, his eyes held something other than despair. Curiosity, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "You came back," Thomas said. "After 6 months, you came back for her." Old Cole nodded, his weathered hands cradling the coffee cup. "Hardest 6 months of my life, son. Harder than tracking outlaws. Harder than any gunfight. Because I had to trust that what I felt was real. That she might feel the same. That some things are worth waiting for. Worth risking your heart for, even when you've already lost so much." "Were you afraid she'd say no?" "Terrified." Cole's smile was gentle with memory. "Rode through a snowstorm thinking the whole way that I might be making the biggest fool's errand of my life. That she'd have moved on, or never felt what I felt. Or that Marcus Hartwell's practical proposal would win out over a former marshal with nothing but a piece of land and a prayer. But she said yes." "She did, and that yes changed everything." The old man set down his cup. "But the story doesn't end there, Thomas. Life had one more test for us. One more moment where we had to choose between the easy path and the right one. Between revenge and mercy. Between the men we'd been and the people we wanted to become." Kate appeared in the doorway, her silver-threaded hair catching the light. She brought fresh lemonade, setting glasses before both men with the easy grace of long habit. Her hand touched Cole's shoulder briefly as she passed, a gesture so natural and intimate that Thomas felt his throat tighten. 30 years married, and they still moved around each other like newlyweds. "Are you telling him about Jacob Garrett?" Kate asked, settling into a chair beside her husband. Cole nodded. "Getting there." "Tell him all of it, Cole. Don't leave out the hard parts." Kate's green eyes found Thomas, and in them he saw understanding that went bone deep. "Your grandfather made a choice that day that saved more than just his own soul. Tell him how." The old man reached for his wife's hand, their fingers intertwining with the unconscious ease of 3 decades. "Let me tell you about the day I learned that the hardest trigger to pull is the one you don't pull at all." Winter gave way to courtship in a rhythm as old as the territory itself. Cole returned the day after his declaration, and the day after that, and the day after that. He rode the 12 miles from his property to Kate's ranch through snow and cold and the occasional bitter wind that made the journey miserable. But he came anyway, steady as sunrise, proving with actions what his words had promised. Some days he stayed to help with ranch work. Repairs that James Mitchell couldn't handle alone suddenly became easier with Cole's capable hands joining the effort. A barn door that had hung crooked for months was rehung properly. Fence posts weakened by time and weather were replaced with new timber. The windmill that drew water from the well received new gears that Cole fabricated himself in the small forge he'd set up on his own property. Kate watched him work with a mixture of appreciation and growing affection. Cole didn't talk much while he labored, didn't fill silence with unnecessary words. But his actions spoke volumes. The way he noticed what needed doing without being asked. The way he worked alongside James as an equal rather than someone to be supervised. The way he always found time to check on Kate, to make sure she had what she needed, to simply be present. Other days they rode together across the snow-covered landscape, her on her sturdy mare and him on the bay gelding he'd purchased after resigning his marshal's commission. They explored the boundaries between their properties, discussed plans for spring planting, shared stories of childhoods spent in different corners of the country. Kate learned that Cole had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith named James who taught his son that true strength came from knowing when to bend and when to stand firm. That his mother Sarah had died in childbirth when Cole was 15, taking the baby sister with her, and that loss had shaped him in ways he was still understanding. That he'd wanted to be a blacksmith like his father until the bank robbery that killed James had set him on a different path entirely. Cole learned that Kate's mother had died when she was 8, leaving her father to raise a daughter in a world that didn't make space for such arrangements easily. That Henry Brennan had taught Kate to read in cipher, to handle accounts and livestock, to see herself as capable rather than limited. That William had been her childhood friend before becoming her husband, and that his death had felt like losing part of herself. They shared meals at Kate's kitchen table, simple food made rich by companionship, coffee and conversation in the mornings, stew and cornbread in the evenings, the rhythm of domestic life slowly weaving them together. January turned to February. The worst of the winter storms passed, leaving the world clean and bright. Cole's house on his property began to take shape. Frame rising from foundation, walls going up board by board. He hired a crew from Copper Ridge, but worked alongside them himself, his carpentry skills learned from his father proving invaluable. One cold February afternoon, Kate rode out to see the progress. The structure stood 2 stories tall now, exactly as Cole had sketched it months ago. Wide porches wrapped the front and side. Large windows would let in light and views. She could see the bones of something substantial, something built to last. Cole met her at the property line, his breath visible in the cold air, sawdust clinging to his work clothes. His smile when he saw her approaching made warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion. "Come see," he said, helping her dismount. "Want to show you something?" He led her through the framed doorway into what would be the main room. The space was larger than she'd expected, open and airy even without walls completed. Cole pointed out where the fireplace would go, where the kitchen would be, where windows would frame views of the creek and distant mountains. "And upstairs," he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty she rarely heard from him, "I wanted to ask your opinion on something." They climbed the temporary stairs to the second floor, where sunlight streamed through unfinished window frames. Cole led her to the largest room, facing east to catch the morning sun. "This would be the main bedroom," he said. "But I wasn't sure about the layout. Thought maybe you'd have ideas, since if things work out the way I'm hoping, you might be living here too." The casual way he said it, like her presence in his home was inevitable and welcome, made Kate's heart skip. "You're very confident, Marshal Matheson." "Former Marshal," he corrected with a slight smile. "And not confident. Hopeful. There's a difference." He turned to face her fully. "I know we're taking this slow. No, it hasn't even been a year since William passed. But Kate, I need you to understand something. This house, this land, everything I'm building, it's all with you in mind. If you say no when the time comes, I'll respect that. But I'm building this home for us, not just for me." Kate looked around the unfinished room, seeing not raw wood and possibility, but a future taking shape. A place they might wake together, a space they might fill with conversation and comfortable silence. The beginning of something that felt more solid with every passing day. "I think," she said carefully, "that the window should go here instead of there, to catch the sunset as well as the sunrise, and maybe built-in shelves along this wall for books." Cole's smile transformed his face. "Sunset and books, I can do that." March brought the first hints of spring, snow melting, to reveal earth ready for renewal. Cole's house neared completion, the roof finished, windows installed, interior walls going up. Kate found herself spending more time there than at her own property, offering suggestions that Cole implemented with careful attention. Sarah Mitchell teased her gently about it one morning over coffee. "You're practically living there already." Kate blushed but didn't deny it. "He listens when I talk. Really listens. Wants to know what I think about things." "James is the same way." Sarah's smile was knowing. "Found yourself a good man, Kate. One who sees you as a partner, not property." "I had a good man before," Kate said quietly, thinking of William. "I'm fortunate enough to have found another." By April, the house was habitable. Not finished entirely, still needed furniture and final touches, but solid and weatherproof and ready. Cole threw a small gathering to celebrate, inviting Kate and the Mitchells, Doc Harrison, a few neighbors. They stood in the empty main room, voices echoing off bare walls, and toasted to new beginnings with whiskey and well wishes. Kate caught Cole watching her throughout the evening with an expression she couldn't quite read. Intent, serious, almost nervous, which seemed strange for a man who'd faced down outlaws without flinching. After the guests departed and the Mitchells had ridden back to Kate's property, Cole asked her to stay a moment longer. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and they walked out onto the front porch to watch. "Kate," Cole said, his voice carrying that uncertain note again, "there's something I need to show you." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, hands not quite steady. Kate recognized his careful printing, the same hand that had sketched the house plans. This looked like architectural drawings, detailed and precise. "I couldn't decide on a final detail without asking you first," Cole said, unfolding the paper to show interior layouts. The bedrooms upstairs. I drew up two different plans, one with two separate bedrooms, one with just the main bedroom we discussed, in a smaller room that could be a study or nursery or whatever we needed. Kate looked at the drawings, understanding dawning. He was asking without asking, giving her the choice, respecting her timeline while making his hopes crystal clear. "Cole," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me say this while I have the courage." He set the drawings aside and took both her hands in his. "Kate Brennan, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, your strength and your kindness, your determination and your grace, it's made me certain of something I suspected that very first day. You're the woman I want to spend my life with, the woman I want to wake up beside and fall asleep next to, the woman I want to build a future with, whatever that future holds." Cole went down on one knee right there on the porch he'd built, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I love you, Kate. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing on your porch with that shotgun, refusing to be driven from your home by men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs. You're the bravest person I've ever known. And I know I'm asking a lot. No, you've already lost one husband, and I'm just a former marshal with calloused hands and a piece of land. But I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my days proving myself worthy of you?" Kate felt tears well up, spilling over to track down her cheeks. Not sad tears, not grief tears, but tears of relief and joy in the overwhelming rightness of this moment. She thought of William's letter, his blessing, given freely. Thought of the months she'd spent rebuilding herself from ashes. Thought of how Cole had returned exactly as he promised, had courted her with patience and respect and steady presence. "Yes," she said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, Cole Matheson, I'll marry you." Cole's face transformed with pure joy. He rose and pulled her into his arms, holding her like something precious and hard-won. When he finally stepped back, he reached into his pocket again and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's," he said, opening the pouch to reveal a ring. Simple gold band set with a single perfect pearl. "My father gave it to me before he died. Said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart the way my mother captured his. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He slipped the ring onto Kate's finger. It fit perfectly, the pearl gleaming softly in the sunset light. Kate stared at this tangible symbol of promises made and futures imagined, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was happening. She was going to marry Cole Matheson and build a life beside him, and the thought filled her with an excitement she hadn't felt since before William's illness. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I'll wait as long as you need." Kate thought about it, about propriety and what people might say about a widow remarrying less than a year after her husband's death. Then she thought about William's letter, telling her to live fully. About the fact that she'd already survived death and violence and loss, and life was too short to waste on other people's opinions. June, she decided, early June. That gives us time to prepare, to let people get used to the idea. And it's not so long that we have to keep living in separate houses, pretending we're not aching to be together. Cole laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. "June it is, and Kate, I promise you I will make you happy. Whatever it takes for however long we have, I will make sure you never regret this." "I already know I won't regret it." Kate stood on her toes and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "You're a good man, Cole Matheson. The best man, and I can't wait to be your wife." They set the date for June 15th, a Wednesday afternoon in the garden behind Kate's original property. The same ground where William was buried because Kate wanted his blessing to be part of the ceremony. Where her father rested too, so both the men who'd shaped her could bear witness to this new beginning. The town buzzed with the news. Some people approved, saying it was good Kate wouldn't be alone anymore. Others whispered that it was too soon, unseemly, disrespectful to William's memory. Kate ignored the whispers. She'd learned the hard way that you couldn't live your life by other people's rules and expectations. Doc Harrison offered to give her away, standing in for her father. Ryan Matheson rode up from Tucson a week early to serve as his brother's best man. Sarah Mitchell helped Kate prepare a dress, altering her mother's wedding gown with careful stitches and additions of lace. The whole community seemed to be preparing for the event, even those who'd whispered disapproval, finding themselves caught up in the excitement. 3 days before the wedding, on a Tuesday afternoon that started peaceful and beautiful, a stranger rode into Copper Ridge asking questions. Kate didn't hear about it until that evening when Doc Harrison arrived at her property, his face grave. She and Sarah were working on final details for the ceremony, arranging wildflowers in jars, when Doc's buggy pulled up faster than usual. "Kate," Doc said without preamble, "there's trouble. Man rode into town this afternoon calling himself Jacob Garrett. Says he's Silas Garrett's younger brother. Says he's here to settle accounts." Kate's blood went cold. "Silas's brother? Been in prison in Texas for the past 2 years on an unrelated charge. Got released 6 weeks ago. Heard about what happened to Silas and came looking for revenge." Doc's weathered face was tight with concern. "He's been drinking at the saloon, making threats. Sheriff Holden knows but says he can't arrest a man for talking. I rode straight here to warn you." Cole and Ryan arrived within the hour, having received word from town as well. They gathered in Kate's kitchen, the four of them plus the Mitchells, discussing options while tension coiled tight in Kate's chest. "We should postpone," Kate said. "Leave for a few weeks until this passes." "Won't pass," Ryan said bluntly. "Man came for blood. He'll wait as long as it takes." Cole was quiet, his face set in hard lines Kate hadn't seen since that morning before the shootout. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but flat. "I won't run, won't let him dictate our lives. And I won't postpone our wedding because some outlaw's brother wants revenge for a killing that was justified and legal." "He's not alone," Doc added. "Hired 2 men from the saloon, drifters, by the look of them. Promised them money if they'd back his play." 3 against 2, Ryan mused. "Not the worst odds we've faced." 3 against 2 plus half the town, James Mitchell corrected. "We can get help. Armed men at the wedding, watching for trouble." They planned through the night. Cole and Ryan would position armed townsmen around the property during the ceremony. If Jacob Garrett made a move, they'd be ready. The wedding would proceed as scheduled. Kate would get her day, and justice would be served if necessary. But Kate barely slept that night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling. She'd found love again, found happiness, found a future worth building. And now violence threatened to steal it all away before she'd even had a chance to live it. The unfairness burned in her throat like bile. The day before the wedding brought a rehearsal, a small gathering of close friends and family. Doc would stand in Henry Brennan's place to give Kate away. Ryan would stand as Cole's best man. Sarah Mitchell as Kate's attendant. Simple and meaningful, exactly what Kate wanted. They just finished walking through the ceremony when hoofbeats announced riders approaching hard. Kate's stomach clenched with premonition. She knew before they came into view what this would be. Jacob Garrett rode up at the head of 3 horses, not 2. He'd found a 3rd man to back his play. They reined to a stop at the edge of the gathering, hands resting pointedly on gun belts, threat implicit in every line of their postures. Jacob himself was maybe 38, with the same dark hair and hard eyes as his brother Silas, but without the bulk. Lean and dangerous, coiled tight with rage held barely in check. He sat his horse like a man comfortable with violence, waiting for an excuse. "Cole Matheson," Jacob called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "You killed my brother." Cole stepped forward, separating himself from the group, his hand hanging loose near his holstered Colt. Behind him, Ryan moved into position, and Kate saw armed townsmen stationed around the property shift their stances subtly. Everyone preparing for war. "Your brother was an outlaw," Cole said, his voice calm but carrying. "Killed innocent people, robbed and murdered his way across 3 territories. He drew on me first while I was wounded. He got what he earned." "Liar!" Jacob's face twisted with fury. "Silas was a good man before this world broke him. You marshals, you serve the powerful, serve the railroads and banks that steal from honest folk. My brother tried to fight back, and you murdered him for it." "Your brother terrorized homesteaders," Cole replied, still calm, still steady. "Threatened to kill women alone on their property. Murdered at least 11 people that we know of. That's not fighting for justice. That's being a killer and hiding behind excuses. You're going to pay for what you did." Jacob's hand moved closer to his gun. "Going to pay with everything." Your life. Her life. Everything you think you're building here. I'm going to burn it to ash. Kate's breath caught, but Cole didn't flinch. Jacob, Cole said, and something in his tone made the outlaw pause. You don't have to do this. Don't have to throw your life away because your brother made bad choices. Walk away. Ride out of here and live. Don't make me kill you too. You think you can take all of us? Cole's smile was cold. I know I can. Ryan and I have faced worse odds. And you're not facing two men. You're facing two former marshals, 6 armed townsmen, and a woman who's already killed one of your brother's gang. How do you think this ends for you? For a moment, genuine uncertainty flickered across Jacob's face. He looked at the armed men positioned around the property, at Ryan's hand near his gun, at Kate standing her ground without fear. The odds clearly weren't what he'd expected, but pride and grief made men stupid. Kate had learned that the hard way. Tomorrow, Jacob said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. After you marry that woman, I want you to have something to lose before I take it all away. I'm coming for you tomorrow, Matheson, for both of you. And there's not enough guns in Arizona to stop me. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his 2 hired men following. The gathered witnesses let out collective breaths they'd been holding. Kate found herself shaking, adrenaline flooding through her system. Cole turned and walked straight to her, pulling her into his arms without a word. She felt his heart hammering against her cheek, felt the tension in his muscles, felt how close they had just come to violence. We should postpone, she said into his chest. No, Cole's voice was firm. We're getting married tomorrow. We're not letting him win. We're not letting fear dictate our lives. What if something happens? What if one of you gets killed? Cole pulled back enough to look into her eyes. His blue gaze held absolute certainty. Then I'll die married to you instead of just promised to you. And that's worth the risk. That night, Kate didn't sleep at all. She sat on her porch wrapped in a quilt, watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. Cole sat beside her, neither of them speaking much, just present for each other in the darkness. I've spent 8 years chasing death, Cole said quietly around 3 a.m, tracking killers, putting myself in danger for a badge and the idea of justice. Now I've finally found a reason to live. Found you. Found the possibility of a real life, a real home, maybe children someday if we're blessed. I'm not giving that up because some angry man wants revenge. I'm done letting death dictate my choices. But what if he kills you? He won't. Cole took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I promise you, Kate, we're going to have our wedding. We're going to have our life together. Jacob Garrett is not taking that from us. Kate wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love and determination could overcome violence and revenge. But she learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. I can't lose you, she whispered. Not now. Not when I've just found you. You won't lose me. Cole raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. I've kept every promise I've made to you, Kate. I'm keeping this one too. Dawn broke beautiful and clear, the kind of perfect June morning that seemed designed for weddings. Kate dressed with Sarah's help, her hands shaking so badly that buttoning her mother's altered gown took 3 tries. The white fabric felt too delicate, too innocent for a day that might end in blood. The garden behind her house had been transformed. Ribbons and wildflowers decorated every available surface. Chairs borrowed from neighbors sat in neat rows. The oak tree where Cole had been wounded during the first shootout now stood draped in white fabric, symbol of survival and new beginnings. Under that tree, Cole would be waiting, if he survived that long. Kate looked at herself in the mirror, 26 years old, soon to be married for the 2nd time, wearing her mother's dress and her mother-in-law's ring. Behind her in the reflection, she could see William's side of the bed, still made exactly as she'd left it that final morning. His memory present but not suffocating, his blessing given freely. You look beautiful, Sarah said softly. I look terrified. You look like a woman about to marry the man she loves. The terror is just part of it. Guests began arriving around noon. Neighbors, friends, half the town of Copper Ridge turning out for the event. Kate watched from the window as they took their seats, as Ryan and 6 other armed men positioned themselves strategically around the property. As Cole took his place under the oak tree, tall and steady in his best suit, his blue eyes scanning the horizon for threats, Doc Harrison came to escort her out. "Ready, child?" Kate took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked through the house, out the back door, toward the garden where her future waited. The afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. Birdsong filled the air, everything perfect and peaceful and about to be shattered. Kate's eyes found Cole standing under the oak tree. He turned as she approached, and his face transformed with such pure love and joy that her breath caught. This was real. This was happening. She was about to marry this good man who'd kept every promise, who'd returned when he said he would, who'd chosen her despite all the easier options. She was halfway down the makeshift aisle when hoofbeats shattered the peace. Jacob Garrett and his 3 hired guns rode hard into the yard, horses snorting and wild-eyed. Guests screamed and scattered, diving for cover. The hired gunmen had their weapons drawn, and Jacob's face was twisted with rage and purpose. "Stop this wedding!" Jacob roared, dismounting fast. "Nobody moves or people die." Kate froze, still 10 yards from Cole. Armed townsmen emerged from their positions, creating a tense standoff. 7 guns on their side against 4 on Jacob's, but innocent people stood between them, trapped in potential crossfire. Cole stepped forward, hands visible and away from his gun belt. Every eye in the yard fixed on him as he moved with deliberate calm toward the mounted outlaws. "Jacob," Cole said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "this doesn't have to end in blood. Your brother made his choices. Don't make the same mistakes. You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away for revenge that won't bring him back or make anything better." "You took my family." Jacob's gun came up, pointing at Cole. "Only family I had left. You think I'm going to let you have yours?" The gun swiveled toward Kate. Everything happened at once. Cole lunged to put himself between Kate and the gun. Ryan fired from his position near the barn, his shot catching one of Jacob's hired men in the shoulder. The man tumbled from his horse screaming. Return fire erupted from all sides, bullets cracking through air and thudding into wood. Kate hit the ground, Sarah pulling her down behind an overturned table. Through the chaos, she saw Cole stumble, saw blood bloom on his shoulder. Not serious, but enough to slow him. Saw Jacob advancing with murder in his eyes. Then Kate did what she promised herself she wouldn't do again. She grabbed a rifle that had fallen from one of the fleeing guests, brought it to her shoulder with hands steadier than they should be, and fired at Jacob's feet. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from him, making him jump back. "Stop!" Kate screamed, standing now, the rifle trained on Jacob's chest. "Just stop!" Jacob stared at her, at this woman in a wedding dress holding a rifle like she knew how to use it. Kate saw the moment his resolve wavered, saw doubt and grief and exhaustion cross his face. The 2nd hired gun went down from Ryan's Winchester. The 3rd threw up his hands in surrender, his gun clattering to the dirt. Jacob stood alone now, surrounded by armed men, facing the woman he'd wanted to kill and seeing something in her eyes that made him hesitate. Cole, bleeding from his shoulder but standing, walked slowly toward Jacob, his hand near his Colt, but not drawing. Just approaching like you'd approach a wounded animal. Steady, calm, showing no threat until threat was necessary. "Jacob," Cole said quietly, close enough now that only the outlaw could hear clearly. "I could kill you right now, shoot you and claim self-defense, and nobody would question it. You threatened my bride, shot at innocent people. I'd be within my rights." Jacob's hand tightened on his gun, but he didn't raise it. "But I'm not going to kill you," Cole continued. "You know why? Because someone taught me that choosing life is harder and braver than choosing death. That revenge just breeds more revenge until everyone's dead and nothing's solved. I'm choosing to let you live, Jacob. Choosing to break that cycle." "Why?" Jacob's voice cracked. "I came here to kill you, to destroy everything you care about. Because you're not your brother. You're a man who loved his family and made bad choices out of grief. I understand that. I lost my father to violence too. Almost let it turn me into something I wasn't. But I had people who showed me a different path." Cole held out his hand, palm open, offering. "I'm showing you that path now. Drop the gun, walk away from this, or stand trial if the law demands it. But live. Don't throw your life away because your brother couldn't see past his own pain. Kate held her breath, the rifle still trained on Jacob, watching this moment balance on a knife edge. Around the yard, every person stood frozen, witnessing something that felt bigger than one man's choice. Jacob looked at Cole's extended hand, looked at Kate standing in her wedding dress with a rifle, looked at Ryan and the armed townsman who could end him in seconds if they chose, looked at the blood spreading across Cole's shoulder from the wound Jacob had caused. Slowly, like it cost him everything, Jacob's gun hand lowered, the weapon dropped from his fingers to thud into the dirt. "I can't," Jacob said, his voice breaking completely. "Can't do it. He's dead. Killing you won't bring him back. Won't fix anything." He sank to his knees, shoulders shaking. "I just want my brother back. That's all I wanted." Cole picked up Jacob's gun, handed it to Ryan, then did something that made Kate's throat tighten with emotion. He reached down and helped Jacob to his feet, not as an enemy, as a man helping another man. "Sheriff Holden," Cole called out. The lawman emerged from where he'd been hiding behind a wagon. "Take Mr. Garrett into custody. Charge him with assault, reckless endangerment, whatever fits. But make sure he gets a fair trial, and make sure he gets to say goodbye to his brother properly. Every man deserves that." Sheriff Holden, shamefaced but grateful for direction, took Jacob into custody. The wounded and surrendering hired guns were rounded up. Doc Harrison immediately went to work on Cole's shoulder, determining the bullet had only grazed him, superficial but bloody. Kate lowered the rifle, her hands finally shaking now that the danger had passed. She walked through the scattered chairs and frightened guests to where Cole stood getting his shoulder bandage. When she reached him, she didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around his waist and held on like he might disappear if she let go. "I'm okay," Cole said into her hair. "We're okay. You let him live." Had to. Had to show him there was another way. And I had to show you, Cole pulled back to look into her eyes, that I'm not the man I was. Not the marshal who saw everything in terms of hunting and justice and the next warrant. I'm the man who wants to build a life with you, who chooses mercy over revenge, who chooses us over the easy path. Kate stood on her toes and kissed him, not caring that half the town was watching, not caring about propriety or decorum or anything except this moment. This man, this choice he'd made that said more about who he was than any words could. When they finally parted, Doc Harrison cleared his throat. "Well, now that everyone's done shooting and we've established that the groom will survive, does anyone want to finish this wedding? I've got the vows memorized and I'd hate to waste them." Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd, tension breaking like a fever. Guests picked up overturned chairs. Sarah helped Kate straighten her dress, which had gotten dirty when she'd hit the ground but was otherwise intact. Ryan retrieved Cole's jacket and helped him into it carefully over his bandaged shoulder, and they started again. Kate walking down the aisle on Doc Harrison's arm toward the man who stood waiting under the oak tree. Cole's face when he saw her approaching held more love than any words could capture. His hand reached for hers, and she took it, and together they faced the preacher who'd hidden under a table during the shooting but was now ready to do his job. "Well," the preacher said with a nervous laugh, "that was certainly an eventful start. Shall we try this again? Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Kate barely heard the words. She was too focused on Cole's face, on the way his thumb stroked gently across her knuckles, on the certainty in his eyes that said he'd meant every promise he'd made. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Ryan called out, "I think we handled that already." And everyone laughed. The vows passed in a blur of emotion. Cole's voice steady as stone when he promised to love and honor and cherish. Kate's voice strong when she made the same promises, meaning every word with a fierceness that came from nearly losing this before it began. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "Marshal, you may now kiss your bride. And please, nobody shoot anyone during this part." Cole kissed Kate like they hadn't been interrupted by violence and threat. Kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and he'd protect her with his last breath. Kissed her like a promise and a prayer, and a declaration that love had won despite everything. The guests cheered. Someone started playing a fiddle. The wedding reception that should have been somber after the violence instead turned joyful. People celebrating not just a marriage but survival, second chances, the triumph of choosing life over death. On the porch in 1915, old Cole finished his story while Thomas sat transfixed. The young man had tears on his cheeks, though he didn't seem to realize it. "You spared him," Thomas said, "even after everything." "I did. And you know what happened?" Cole's smile was gentle. Jacob Garrett stood trial, served 5 years in territorial prison for assault. When he got out, he moved to California, started a legitimate freight business, married a good woman, had 3 children. Last I heard, he named his oldest son Silas to honor his brother, but raised that boy to make better choices, to use the anger and grief as fuel to build something good instead of tearing things down. Kate leaned forward, her hand still in Cole's. "Breaking the cycle of violence, Thomas. That's what your grandfather taught me that day. That mercy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength." Thomas wiped his eyes. "Emma's been gone 2 weeks. I keep thinking my life is over, that the best part is behind me, and all that's left is surviving until I die too." Cole stood, moved to sit beside his grandson, putting an arm around the young man's shoulders. "I know that feeling, son. Felt it when my father died. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life hunting the men who killed him. That revenge was the only meaning left. Your grandmother taught me different, taught me that endings can be beginnings if you're brave enough to let them." "How do I do that?" Thomas asked. "How do I move forward when it hurts this much?" Kate spoke, her voice full of hard-won wisdom. "You grieve Emma, honor her memory, but you don't bury yourself with her. You're 26 years old, Thomas. You have so much life ahead of you, so much love still to give and receive. Emma wouldn't want you to stop living, just like William didn't want that for me." "Your grandmother stood on a porch with a shotgun choosing to abandon everything," Cole said. "I was a marshal choosing revenge over healing. We found each other in that broken moment, and we built something that lasted 30 years and counting. We had your mother Margaret and your uncle William, named for the good man who came before me. We built this ranch and this life in this family. None of that would exist if we'd chosen death over life that day." Thomas looked at them, at the way they still held hands after 3 decades, at the life they'd built from ashes and second chances. "Tell me it gets easier." "It doesn't get easier," Kate said honestly. "The missing doesn't go away, but it becomes part of you instead of all of you. And eventually, if you let it, new love grows around the old, not replacing it, growing beside it." "Some endings are just beginnings in disguise," Cole added. "All you need is courage to let them unfold." Thomas nodded slowly, something like hope dawning in his eyes for the first time since Emma's death. He looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the land his grandparents had fought for and built upon, at the legacy they'd created from violence and loss and the determination to keep living. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for telling me this, for showing me it's possible. It's more than possible, son." Cole squeezed his shoulder. "It's what we owe to the people we've lost, to live fully, to love deeply, to build something that honors their memory by proving that death doesn't get the final word. Life does, always life." As the sun moved toward the western horizon, the 3 of them sat together on the porch, talking and remembering and planning. Thomas asked questions about his grandmother's first husband, wanting to know about the man he'd been named for. Kate answered honestly, sharing memories of William without pretending the pain hadn't been real, but also sharing how that pain had eventually made space for new joy. Inside the house, Kate prepared dinner while Cole and Thomas worked on the ranch equipment that always needed tending. The rhythm of domestic life, ordinary and precious, continuing as it had for 30 years. That evening, as Kate and Cole prepared for bed, she caught sight of their reflection in the mirror. Gray-haired now, faces lined by time and weather, but still recognizably the people who'd stood under that oak tree and promised forever. "Think we got through to him?" Kate asked. "I think so." Cole came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Takes time, but he's strong, like you. He'll find his way." Kate leaned back against her husband's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady against her spine. 30 years they'd been married. 30 years of building a life, raising children, weathering droughts and disease, and all the 1,000 small crises that came with ranching. They'd buried parents and friends, welcomed grandchildren, watched Arizona Territory become a state, and Cole helped write its constitution. Through all of it, they'd had each other. Had this partnership built on respect and trust and the kind of love that grew deeper with time rather than fading. No regrets? Cole asked, his traditional question on anniversaries and special occasions. Kate smiled at their reflection. Not a single one. She thought of that morning 30 years ago when she'd stood on her porch ready to abandon everything. Thought of William's generous blessing from beyond the grave. Thought of Cole riding through a snowstorm because he couldn't stop thinking about her. Thought of the choice he'd made to spare Jacob Garrett, proving that mercy was stronger than vengeance. All of it, the pain and the loss and the finding had led to this moment, to this life, to this man who still held her like she was precious after 3 decades of marriage. I love you, she said, turning in his arms to face him. Then now, always. And I love you, Cole replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Best decision I ever made, riding back to Copper Ridge that December. Best thing that ever happened to me was a terrified widow with a shotgun and enough courage to face down 6 outlaws. They stood there in their bedroom, holding each other in the lamplight, 2 people who'd found second chances and built something beautiful from the ruins of loss. Outside, the ranch they'd created together spread across the Arizona landscape. Inside, the warmth of a life well lived surrounded them. Some endings were just beginnings in disguise. Kate had learned that lesson the hard way, through blood and grief and the terrifying vulnerability of opening her heart again. But she'd learned it thoroughly, and now, as she watched her grandson begin to learn the same lesson, she felt the circle complete. They'd survived. They'd thrived. They'd built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, and they'd done it by choosing life over death, mercy over revenge, love over fear. By believing that tomorrow could be better than today if you were brave enough to fight for it. That night, Kate dreamed of oak trees and wedding dresses, of blue eyes and gentle hands, of a life that had exceeded every expectation. She dreamed of William smiling his approval from whatever place good men go when they die. She dreamed of the ranch stretching green and prosperous under summer sun, of grandchildren playing in the yard where she'd once faced down outlaws, of Cole's steady presence beside her through all the years. And when she woke in the morning, Cole was there. Still there. Always there. Exactly as he'd promised 30 years ago when he'd ridden through a snowstorm to claim his second chance. Some promises, Kate had learned, were worth keeping forever. Some love stories didn't end with death. They just found new ways to begin again, stronger and deeper for having survived the fire. This was their story. A story of winter giving way to spring, of ashes becoming fertile ground, of endings that were really just disguised beginnings. A story of second chances and the courage to take them. And it was far from over.